Everybody, I am back with chapter 10, and as you can see, I am in a different room in my house, and my voice might sound a little bit funny. I had kind of a cough, so we will do the best that we can do. All right, okay, we are in chapter 10 now of the Secret Garden, and the title of chapter 10 is called Dickon. And again, I have to profusely apologize for my accents, okay? Because somewhere out there is someone who actually does speak broad Yorkshire, and I'm sure if they ever saw these videos, they would not be happy with me. So we'll just take this as a theatrical license. How's that? Chapter 10, Dickon. The sun shone down for nearly a week on the secret garden. The secret garden was what Mary called it when she was thinking of it. She liked the name, and she liked still more the feeling that when its beautiful old walls shut her in, no one knew where she was. It seemed almost like being shut out of the world in some fairy place. The few books she had read and liked had been fairy story books, and she had read of secret gardens in some of those stories. Sometimes people went to sleep in them for 100 years, which she had thought must be rather stupid. She had no intention of going to sleep, and in fact she was becoming wider awake every day which passed at Misselthwaite. She was beginning to like to be out of doors. She no longer hated the wind, but enjoyed it. She could run faster and longer, and she could skip up to 100. The bulbs in the secret garden must have been much astonished. Since nice, clear places were made round them, they had all the breathing space they wanted. And really, if Mistress Mary had known it, they began to cheer up under the dark earth and work tremendously. The sun could get at them and warm them, and when the rain came down it could reach them at once, so they began to feel very much alive. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's jet planes outside right now. So if they get really loud, just know that the Air Force fighter pilots in training are busy doing their jobs today. Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something to be determined about. She was very much absorbed indeed. She worked and dug and pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. She found many more of the sprouting pale green points than she had ever hoped to find. They seemed to be starting up everywhere, and each day she was sure she found tiny new ones, some so tiny that they had barely peeped above the earth. There were so many that she remembered what Martha had said about the snowdrops by the thousands, and about bulbs spreading and making new ones. These had been left to themselves for 10 years, and perhaps they had spread, like the snowdrops, into thousands. She wondered how long it would be before they showed that they were flowers. Sometimes she stopped digging to look at the garden and try to imagine what it would be like when it was covered with thousands of lovely things in bloom. During that week of sunshine, she became more intimate with Ben Weatherstaff. She surprised him several times by seeming to start up beside him as if she sprang out of the earth. The truth was that she was afraid that he would pick up his tools and go away if he saw her coming, so she always walked toward him as silently as possible. But in fact, he did not object to her as strongly as he had at first. Perhaps he was secretly rather flattered by her evident desire for his elderly company. Then, also, she was more civil than she had been. He did not know that when she first saw him, she spoke to him as if she would have spoken to a native, and had not known that a cross, sturdy, old Yorkshire man was not accustomed to salaam to his masters, and be merely commanded by them to do things. "Thou'rt like the robin," he said to her one morning, when he lifted his head and saw her standing by him. "I never knows when I shall see thee, or which side I'll come from." "He's friends with me now," said Mary. "That's like him," snapped Ben Weatherstaff. "Making up to the women folk, just for vanity and flightiness. There's nothing he wouldn't do for the sake of showing off and flirting his tail feathers. He's as full of pride as an egg's full of meat." He very seldom talked much, and sometimes did not even answer Mary's questions except by a grunt. But this morning he said more than usual. He stood up and rested one hob-nailed boot on the top of his spade while he looked her over. "How long has thou been here?" he jerked out. "I think it's been about a month," she answered. "Thou's beginning to do Misselthwaite credit," he said. "Thou's a bit fatter than when thou's not quite so yellow. Thou looked like a young plucked crow when thou first came into the garden. Thinks I to myself, I never set eyes on an uglier, sour-faced young'un." Mary was not vain, and as she had never thought much of her looks, she was not greatly disturbed. "I know I'm fatter," she said. "My stockings are getting tighter. They used to make wrinkles. There's the robin, Ben Weatherstaff." There indeed was the robin, and she thought he looked nicer than ever. His red waistcoat was as glossy as satin, and he flirted his wings and tail and tilted his head and hopped about with all sorts of lively graces. He seemed determined to make Ben Weatherstaff admire him, but Ben was sarcastic. "Aye, there thou art," he said. "Thou can put up with me for a bit sometimes when thou's got no one better. Thou's been reddening up thy waistcoat and polishing thy feathers these 2 weeks. I know what thou's up to. Thou's courting some young bold maiden somewhere, telling thy lies to her, and been thy finest cock robin in Misselthwaite, and ready to fight all of the rest of 'em." "Oh, look at him!" exclaimed Mary. The robin was evidently in a fascinating, bold mood. He hopped closer and closer and looked at Ben Weatherstaff more and more engagingly. He flew on to the nearest currant bush and tilted his head and sang a little song right at him. "Thou thinks thou'll get over me by doing that," said Ben, wrinkling his face up in such a way that Mary felt sure he was trying not to look pleased. "Thou thinks no one can stand out against thee. That's what thou thinks." The robin spread his wings. Mary could scarcely believe her eyes. He flew right up to the handle of Ben Weatherstaff's spade and alighted on top of it. Then the old man's face wrinkled itself slowly into new expression. He stood still, as if he were afraid to breathe, as if he would not have stirred for the world, lest his robin would start away. He spoke quite in a whisper. "Well, I'm danged," he said, as softly as if he were saying something quite different. "Thou does know how to get onto a chap, thou does. That's fair unearthly, that's so knowing." And he stood without stirring, almost without drawing his breath, until the robin gave another flirt to his wings and flew away. Then he stood looking at the handle of the spade, as if there might be magic in it, and then he began to dig again and said nothing for several minutes. But because he kept breaking into a slow grin now and then, Mary was not afraid to talk to him. "Have you a garden of your own?" she asked. "No, I'm bachelor and on lodge, with Martin at the gate." "If you had one," said Mary, "what would you plant?" "Cabbages and taters and onions." "But if you wanted to make a flower garden," persisted Mary, "what would you plant?" "Bulbs and sweet-smelling things, but mostly roses." Mary's face lighted up. "Do you like roses?" she said. Ben Weatherstaff rooted up a weed and threw it aside before he answered. "Well, yes, I do. I was learned that by that young lady I was gardener to. She had a lot in a place that she was fond of, and she loved 'em like they was children, or robins. I've seen her bend over and kiss 'em." He dragged out another weed and scowled at it. "They were as much as 10 year ago." "Where is she now?" asked Mary, much interested. "Heaven," he answered, and drove his spade deep into the soil, according to what the parson says. "What happened to the roses?" Mary asked again, more interested than ever. "They was left to themselves." Mary was becoming quite excited. "Did they quite die? Do roses quite die when they are left to themselves?" she ventured. "Well, I'd got to like 'em, and I liked her, and she liked 'em," Ben Weatherstaff admitted reluctantly. "Once or twice a year I'd go and work at 'em a bit, prune 'em and dig out the roots. They run wild, but they was in rich soil, and so some of 'em lived. When they have no leaves, and look grey and brown and dry, how can you tell whether they are dead or alive? Inquired Mary. Wait till the spring gets at 'em. Wait till the sun shines on 'em, and the rain falls on, and the sunshine, and then they'll find out. How? Cried Mary, forgetting to be careful. Look along the twigs and branches, and if thou see a bit of brown lumps swelling here and there, watch it after the warm and rain and see what happens. He stopped suddenly and looked curiously at her eager face. Why does they care so much about roses and such all of a sudden? He demanded. Mistress Mary felt her face grow quite red. She was almost afraid to answer. I want to play that I have a garden of my own, she stammered. There was nothing for me to do. I have nothing, no one. Well, said Ben Weatherstaff slowly as he watched her, that's true. That hasn't. He said it in such an odd way that Mary wondered if he was actually a little sorry for her. She had never felt sorry for herself. She had only felt tired and cross because she disliked people and things so much. The world seemed to be changing and getting nicer. If no one found out about the secret garden, she should enjoy herself, always. She stayed with him for 10 or 15 minutes longer and asked him as many questions as she dared. He answered every one of them in his queer grunting way, and he did not seem really cross and did not pick up his spade and leave her. He said something about roses just as she was going away, and it reminded her of the ones he had said he had been fond of. Do you go and see those roses now? She asked. Not been this year. My rheumatics has made me too stiff in the joints. He said it in his grumbling voice, and then quite suddenly he seemed to get angry with her, though she did not see why he should. Now look here, he said sharply. Don't thou ask so many questions. Thou'rt the worst wench for asking questions I have ever come across. Get thee gone and play thee. I'm done talking for today. And he said it so crossly that she knew there was not the least use in staying another minute. She went skipping slowly down the outside walk, thinking him over and saying to herself that, queer as it was, here was another person whom she liked in spite of his crossness. She liked old Ben Weatherstaff. Yes, she did like him. She always wanted to try to make him talk to her. Also, she began to believe that he knew everything in the world about flowers. There was a laurel hedge walk which curved round the secret garden and ended at a gate which opened into a wood in the park. She thought she would slip around this walk and look into the wood and see if there were any rabbits hopping about. She enjoyed the skipping very much, and when she reached the little gate she opened it and went through because she heard a low, peculiar whistling sound and wanted to find out what it was. And I'm going to take a break from chapter 10 right now because chapter 10 is another long chapter. So we will continue with part 2 of chapter 10 in just a bit.